Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Sustaining Sustainability. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, Professor and Director of the Center for Sustainable Business at the University of Pittsburgh. Today, I'm really happy to say that we are joined by someone who has been a guest here before, Mr. Paul Polman, who is currently co-founder of Imagine and used to be the CEO of Unilever. Paul serves on the Strategic Advisory Council of the Center for Sustainable Business, for which we are very grateful. He and I have also published a couple of articles together, one in MIT Sloan Management Review, the other in Stanford Social Innovation Review, and Paul was also kind enough to write a foreword for my book, Small Actions, Big Difference. Paul, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, CB, for having me, and obviously an honor to be on your advisory board for the university as well for the Sustainable Center. Great admiration.
And thank you for everything you do for the center, for all your great advice, which is actually helping us gain momentum and do the work that so much of the world needs today. So, my utmost gratitude. Before we get started, there is always so much conversation about how you went, where you went, and that you wanted to be a priest, all these stories going around. Can you give us a quick snapshot of your career up to this point and where you are now leading Imagine?
Yeah, well, really quickly, I've always believed a little bit in serendipity, creating opportunities and then picking the one you like and not looking back. So my life has always, in that sense, been a little bit unpredictable. I indeed wanted to be a priest and changed my mind, and then I wanted to be a doctor and didn't get into the university in the Netherlands where we have a lottery system. So my father made clear that one day I had to make my own living. So like everybody in those days, you then either picked law or you picked economics. I did economics, wasn't really very motivated, may I say, quickly finished my bachelor's. And then I got this bright idea at the spur of the moment to go to the US and look around there. I ended up for some reason of serendipity in Cincinnati. So I hang around Cincinnati, went to universities, and not having my grades with me, not having any money, not really having a student visa or anything. Most of them rejected me, except one professor in economics, Professor Graycraft, which I'm eternally grateful. And when I ended up was in his office at, I still don't know why he let me in actually, but he said, okay, got your situation. He said, if you teach Paul Samuelson 101, you pass your TOEFL test, and you get straight A's in your semester, we'll give you a scholarship. So I did that, worked a little bit harder than I normally did, and ended up having a scholarship. Then I started working for a professor in finance, Professor Melnick, on the rate utility cases. A lot of that comes from economics, Mondigliani and Miller, and all these models that you're familiar with. So I ended up doing my MA and my MBA, but I had to earn a little bit more money than just getting free tuition. So I was also a maintenance man in the weekends in the building, and I had to take these evening courses. So sure enough, I met a lot of people from P&G in these activities, and obviously P&G is the headquarters in Cincinnati. So it was a small step when I graduated that they asked to join that company, which was a great honor. And I spent 27 years in P&G moving around the world, culminating in being responsible for the European business, which brought me to Geneva. At the tender age of 50, I really had enough of the corporate life and certainly didn't want to go back to Cincinnati after discovering that there were some other places in the world that were slightly more attractive, if I may say. So I decided to quit and work on our foundation that my wife and I had created for the blind people called the Kilimanjaro Blind Trust. But soon I discovered that that alone wasn't enough for my energy, and Nestle kept calling. So I became the CFO of Nestle. Peter Brabeck at that time was the chair, and he asked me to come in. And I'd never been a CFO, didn't know the difference between a balance sheet and an income statement, but I thought it was such an exciting opportunity that I didn't want to miss. And then after 3 years in Nestle, this wonderful opportunity came where Unilever was looking for a new CEO, and I accepted that basically perhaps for the challenge. The company wasn't doing very well, and I felt it had enough in there to deserve to do better. And obviously being Dutch, and this at that time was a big, one of the biggest companies in Europe, but certainly in the Netherlands. So that's how I ended up in Unilever. Did that for 10 years, had a ball. and hopefully contributed a little bit to the company. Showed that business models could change, that companies could do the right thing for society, but also for the shareholders. And then I discovered at the end of my 10-year tenure, more or less, which was enough for me, that really CEOs are held to a higher level of accountability than they really can all deliver on themselves. Think about issues like human rights in the value chain, or deforestation, or plastics in the ocean. So I created Imagine, which really is a neutral platform where we bring CEOs at critical mass together across the value chain to make them all collectively more courageous, but then also drive these broader systems changes that we need to address these burning issues we're undoubtedly going to talk about.
Thank you for that great snapshot. It is just fascinating to hear your career path, and may I say that you're very modest about your contributions at Unilever. I mean, we all know that Unilever is considered today the leading light in terms of the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan and everything else that it has accomplished in the space of sustainability and ESG. And I'm sure we will revisit some of those lessons going forward in this podcast. So let's come to the book, Net Positive. Why did you write this book, and why is the net positive message important now?
Well, CB, I never really wanted to write a book because I've always felt that CEOs that write a book is either because they want to rewrite history or they want to stroke their ego, and both of them were not very appealing to me. And frankly, I felt that much of what I knew and what I was trying to practice was a wonderful organization was what I'd learned from other people, including yourself. So I felt that most of that knowledge was out there already. So I thought about it, and it is indeed true that on the most burning challenges like climate change and biodiversity destruction, inequality, we're not moving fast enough in addressing these major issues. We're thinking too linear versus exponential. So I thought it's probably a good idea to reframe what good looks like. In this economic system that we're now living in, it's very clear that it's broken, it's not working for everybody, and it's not longer term sustainable. I've always said no healthy people on an unhealthy planet. And increasingly, we've seen that these things like poverty and climate change or racial exclusion or biodiversity destruction are all closely linked. So what we were trying to do with this book is really reframe what good looks like. And Net Positive, the book that says how courageous companies thrive by giving more than they take, is really asking a very simple question. How can companies profit from solving the world's problems, not creating them? With the ultimate question, is the world better off because your business is in it or not? Most companies are still in the CSR space, which is being less bad, and that's simply not good enough anymore. So net positive companies are companies that think restorative, reparative, regenerative, actually leaving the world better than you find it. And that's really the framing that we want to do. The second thing that we want to achieve with the book is really drive this, not only this mindset change, but creating the movements where people will say, I want to go to a net positive university. I want to work for a net positive company. I want my company to be net positive. So really creating this movement of what good looks like. So the book is a very much of a how book, as we are all basically there on the why. And what makes it so interesting is it's written by someone that has done it, ran a publicly traded big multinational, one of the biggest ones in the world. And so nothing wrong with the academic side or the consulting side, but we were fortunate enough to bring in our own experience and some of the best in class companies around that. We define net positive really in 5 steps. It's a company that takes ownership of all of its impacts and consequences in the world, intended or not. Many companies think they can outsource their value chain and also outsource their responsibility. That doesn't work anymore. The second thing that net positive companies do is they operate for the long-term benefit of business and society. They create positive return for all stakeholders, and they see shareholder value, frankly, as a result of what they do, not as a goal. And what I like is really the last part of a net positive company, that they partner to forge the broader systems changes that are needed. We can go through the details of the book a little bit. I don't want to spend time on it now, but for us, it's really personal leadership where it starts and ends. that drives company leadership and ultimately creates this broader societal leadership that we need.
Maybe that's a good segue to my next question, which would be how should businesses get started with embedding these frameworks within their own organizations? Where should they begin?
Well, it's not easy, as you know, and there are a lot of challenges out there. We're seeing the scale of the industrial revolution and the speed of the technological revolution, and that's a quite disruptive thing that CEOs have to deal with. So, in order to do this actually and to implement these changes, if you want to, we need to start with ourselves. It starts with a personal alignment that then helps us get values alignment, that then drives to mission alignment, and then ultimately the structural alignment that we need. And as you know, sustainable organizations require yourself to be sustainable. So healthy organizations require yourself to be healthy. So as we heal business, we need to start working on self-healing. So it begins with your own personal journey, finding your own purpose, and making that collectively the cornerstone of the company's purpose, if you want to. Then it's key that we enroll all the employees in there. We spent a lot of time the first year on discovering our own purpose and then leveling that up to the company purpose. So how a company then translates that, once you have this higher purpose, it starts with really listening and awareness to all of your stakeholders to find out really what is needed, where can you have the biggest impact or assume the biggest responsibility. Take an honest assessment of where you are and measure that and set clear targets. In our case, we had 50 targets. Make that public. In our case, we said, we can't do it alone and we'll be fully accountable for that, but we need help and on getting to these solutions. It made us human and it attracted the broader partnerships. Obviously, once you've done that and you start working and putting your own house in order and you work at the industry level to move them forward, then you start to get in the broader system thinking. And that for us was obviously the more exciting part, where we started working with governments and civil society to drive these broader changes, like transforming Indonesia to sustainable palm oil, or reducing deforestation, or working on the Ruggie frameworks and implementing human rights at a broader scale. That was having a multiplier impact. In all of this, the hardest part probably is to be consistent. There's every company has some elements of this net positive in them, and many commitments are made that go into that direction. But how do you do it consistently across all parts of your business?
Thank you for that. One thing that intrigues me is the idea of system changes. What are the main system changes that need to be happening right now? You alluded to partnerships, so maybe you can also talk about your work at Imagine a bit. How do partnerships and advocacy drive these changes as part of a net positive journey?
Yeah, and system change is very important. As I said, we spend too much time on everything has become short term, the political arena as well. So we spend more time on this on reacting to symptoms than we really spend time on correcting the underlying causes, and that's probably very difficult. And there are many barriers to do that, not least the short termism, but also a lot of white spots. Many CEOs, believe it or not, are not really first in ESG. They're simply not aware of the issues and what can be done. The majority still prefers the comfort zone. And then there's the issue of fear that makes people freeze or flight or fight, but not really move it forward in the right direction. So for us, the bigger systems changes that obviously need to help in a system that we're in is at the individual level, I would say you need to find these different types of leaders. We're definitely short on them. Cooperative leadership versus competitive leadership is probably how I would put it, very simple. The second thing is we need to decouple our growth from environmental impact. We're well beyond the planetary boundaries on most of these measures. So it requires us to reconfigure our energy systems, our food systems, our mobility systems, our building systems. And as you and I know, climate change is probably the most important factor of that. But increasingly, people start to understand also the need to restore and protect biodiversity. Our natural systems really give us life, and destroying them is not a smart thing. But then, next to the environmental or planetary things, we also need to drive the social or the human level changes. Any society where more people feel they're not participating or left behind will ultimately rebel against itself. And that's what we are seeing. So, how do we close this gap and go back to these basic values of dignity and respect, equity, compassion for everybody? So, this just transition or driving this inclusion is the third systems change that we need. And the key driver for these systems changes, in my opinion, more than anything, will be redefining what success looks like. If success continues to be earning more money for a few people and making the rest poorer, or if success continues to mean depleting the scarce world's resources so that future generations don't have a chance and many others are increasingly suffering, and that's not a good definition of success. But if we can decouple growth from environmental impact, if we can go to a broader health and well-being measure where we value quality of education, peace, air we can breathe, forest we can walk in, that's the type of direction we want to take.
Fascinating. And to think that change starts with yourself. And a business leader saying that, that's why I call you CEO. So, Paul, what is one lesson business leaders or any leaders should take from your book?
Oh man, this is the toughest one you're asking me, because this book is so comprehensive that it's not just simply one lesson. But if there is perhaps one lesson, and I'll talk a little bit more, but this leadership from the head and the heart, with values like empathy, compassion, humanity, humility, will create this higher level of trust and build this leadership that we need for prosperity. So we might call it bringing humanity back to business and how to do that. The second message in the book really is the enormous opportunity that we have in front of us. This is a message of hope. This is not a message of fear. At a moment where we are right now, where we can see that the cost of not acting becomes significantly higher than the cost of acting, and COVID is a good example of that, and the cost we have borne collectively, then it also, if you turn that around, becomes a tremendous economic opportunity. These sustainable development goals, rebuilding or building back better, as Biden now uses the European slogan, is a huge opportunity to create new businesses, more resilient jobs, better livelihoods. And then the third thing is that we really need to move out of maximizing a system that doesn't work, but foster these broader partnerships, CB, to drive these more discontinuous changes. And I think these are the broader messages, with probably the final message. The importance is to do that consistently in all you do, and not just cherry picking and celebrating. I always remind people that although it's a challenge, it's becoming increasingly more possible to do this because of technology becoming more available, cost of action, inaction, the younger generations, Generation Z and millennials demanding it. So we're really at a sweet spot to push through. And the difference is that we are going in a linear way. We need to go in an exponential way. So right now it's all about that speed and scale that we need to push.
No time like the present. Fascinating conversation, but we are coming to the close of our time. So, one last question. Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
I think, first of all, if you have to choose between an optimist and a pessimist, always pick an optimist, because you have the same life, but an optimist has a happier life. So that is always more appealing to me. But in seriousness, I heard Desmond Tutu say on the panel I was on with him at the UN, when he was asked that same question, he said, "I'm a prisoner of hope." And I've always quoted him on that, a prisoner of hope. By all means, study after study shows that we can solve these issues in the time frame that we set ourselves and that the world needs, and that we're all better for it. So if we can drive ourselves to this higher level of moral consciousness, of working together at different levels of partnership, then we ought to stay hopeful. As I said, technology is becoming goes always faster. We underestimate the speed of technology, and we can address 70-80% of the issues that we have with technology that is available today, and actually is also more profitable. Then the second thing is really the financial market is starting to move. And that's actually a good thing. In Glasgow, we saw $130 trillion of money under management, half the world's money, commit with the Glasgow Financial Alliance on net zero to decarbonize their portfolios. That's an incredible movement. And when the financial market wakes up, it shows that something is happening. And then last but not least, it's really the young generation. 50% of the world population is below 30 years old. They are screaming to have a seat at the table. I'm advocating in many cases that we actually should give them the table. They're more creative, they're technologically savvy, they understand the power of partnerships, more purpose driven. And yes, they do think intergenerationally more than we do. So if you put all these elements together, you get a cocktail that certainly gives me hope, and I look certainly forward to continuing for a long time to be part of that journey.
Fantastic. And I hope to be there alongside you trying to bring about change. We've been talking to Paul Polman, ex CEO of Unilever and co founder of Imagine. Paul's new book is Net Positive, and you've heard tidbits from that. It's available wherever books are sold. Paul, thank you so much for taking your precious time and spending a little bit of it with us today.
No, thank you, CB, and more importantly, thank you for what you are doing to make this a better world for all. And as you're making a pitch for Net Positive, I also can encourage people to buy your book. Small Actions, Big Difference is a great way to start and get yourself enrolled if you aren't fully yet. So, but above all, be safe and hopefully see you soon in person.
And before I sign off, I do want to say that this podcast is made possible with the help of my colleagues Chris Gassman, who's Associate Director at the Center for Sustainable Business, and Danny Nye, who is Center Associate at the Center for Sustainable Business. I'm your host, CB Bhattacharya, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks with another edition of Sustaining Sustainability.